In a land ruled by iron and fear, Aveline, a blacksmith's daughter, forges weapons and a revolution. As whispers of rebellion ignite across villages, she rises from the flames to lead a fight against the tyrannical Baron de Clermont. Torn between duty, love, and sacrifice, Aveline must decide what she's willing to burn for freedom. The Blacksmith Queen is the story of a woman forged in fire, destined to reshape her world.
The morning sun cast a pale light over the small village nestled in the rolling hills of medieval France. Smoke curled upward from the thatched roofs as roosters crowed, and the faint clatter of wooden wheels echoed down the narrow dirt paths. At the edge of the village, where the earth met the dense forest, stood a modest blacksmith's workshop alive with noise and fire. Inside, Aveline worked with the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil, sparks flying like tiny stars bursting into the dusky air. Her arms moved with practiced grace, muscles taut beneath a suit-darkened linen shirt. Dark hair was tied back tightly, stray strands clinging to her damp forehead. The glow of molten steel reflected in her piercing grey eyes, which burned with an intensity far beyond her years. Beside her, her father, a broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and weathered skin, watched silently, pride flickering in his gaze. "Strike here," he instructed softly, nodding towards the glowing metal. "Keep the blade balanced. It must be true." Aveline obeyed, the hammer ringing clear and true as she shaped the weapon. The heat was relentless, but her spirit was fierier still. This craft was more than metal and fire, it was survival, defiance, and hope. Her father had taught her well, but she was no mere apprentice. Her skill was exceptional, and in the quiet moments, she dreamed of a future far beyond the boundaries of their village. Outside, the village stirred uneasily. Whispers of unrest drifted through the air like smoke. The nobles had increased taxes again, demanding more grain, more labor, more obedience. Rumors of uprisings in neighboring regions reached even their remote corner, carried by travelers and traders. The peasants' faces were drawn tight with fear and anger. Many spoke in hushed tones of revolt and justice. Aveline paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and glanced toward the hill where the noble manor stood. Its stone walls gleamed coldly under the rising sun, banners bearing the crest of Baron de Clermont snapping arrogantly in the breeze. The manor was a silent sentinel of oppression, a constant reminder of the power that crushed the common folk beneath its heel. Her father approached, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "The world beyond our forge is harsh, Aveline, but the strength you wield here, it can shape more than steel." She met his eyes, fierce and unyielding. "Then we will shape it, father." That evening, as the village settled into uneasy quiet, Aveline remained by the forge, the only light in the blacksmith's workshop a flickering flame. She worked late into the night, crafting a blade unlike any other, balanced and sharp, a symbol of precision and purpose. Each strike of the hammer echoed her unspoken vow, to fight, to protect, to rise. The sounds of the village faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of her work and the crackling fire. Outside, shadows deepened, but within a fierce light burned, heralding the dawn of rebellion. The blacksmith's daughter was ready to face the flames of a world on the brink of change. As the stars wheeled overhead, Aveline's thoughts turned to the road ahead. The peasants' suffering was no longer distant news, it was a call to arms, a summons she could no longer ignore. The forge was her crucible, and she would be forged anew, a queen born not of blood, but of steel and fire. The night held its breath. The village lay quiet beneath a sky heavy with the promise of storm. Aveline worked amid the glowing coals of the forge, the heat pressing down on her like a living thing. Her hands, calloused and steady, shaped a crude dagger, each strike a sharp note in the night stillness. The rhythmic clang of hammer on steel echoed through the empty streets, a sound both familiar and defiant. Around her, the scent of burning coal and molten metal mingled with the damp earth, a heady perfume of struggle and survival. Outside, the village bore the marks of hardship. Thatched roofs sagged under the weight of neglect, and faces worn by toil and hunger peered from shuttered windows. Rumors had begun to stir, whispers of distant uprisings, of peasants rising against the yoke of noble tyranny. Aveline had heard the stories from travelers and merchants, their voices low and urgent. Tonight, beneath the veil of darkness, she would act. She moved quietly through the village, her footsteps muffled by the soft earth. In the shadowed corner of the tavern, a small group had gathered, their faces etched with worry and hope. The flickering candlelight danced across their features, men and women worn by years of oppression, yet still burning with the desire for change. Aveline's voice was low but steady as she shared news of resistance and the need for weapons forged not for plowshares but for battle. Jax arrived shortly after, his lean frame slipping through the door with practiced ease. His weathered face bore the marks of distant wars, eyes sharp and ever watchful. He spoke of tactics and the necessity of training, his words grounding the restless energy that surged among the villagers. Elise followed, her red hair aflame in the dim room, her green eyes bright with passion. She spoke fiercely of rights and justice, her speeches igniting sparks that caught in the hearts of all who listened. Together, they forged more than weapons. That night they forged a bond, a fragile unity born of shared pain and a fierce yearning for freedom. But with every whispered plan and secret meeting came the shadow of danger. The nobles' soldiers patrolled the roads, their heavy boots a constant reminder of the cost of defiance. The laughter that echoed from the manor was cruel and hollow, a chilling soundtrack to the villagers' fears. Aveline's thoughts drifted to her family, to the taxes that bled the village dry and the cruel edicts that crushed their spirit. The fire in her chest blazed hotter than the forge's flames, a relentless call to arms. She knew the path ahead was fraught with peril, that betrayal and bloodshed awaited. Yet, beneath the weight of uncertainty, hope flickered fragile, fierce and unyielding. As the night deepened, the villagers dispersed, returning to their homes with quiet resolve. Aveline lingered at the forge, her hands stained with soot and sweat, eyes fixed on the dagger cooling in the embers. It was a small thing, but in its steel lay the promise of rebellion, a promise that the whispers would soon become a roar. She looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn threatened to break. The world was changing, and so was she. The Blacksmith Queen was no longer a dream, it was a destiny waiting to be forged in fire and blood. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the village square, where the air hung thick with a mixture of dust, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of the forge. From his vantage upon the battlements of the imposing stone manor, Baron de Clermont surveyed the unrest below with an unyielding gaze. His tall frame, encased in polished armor that gleamed with ruthless precision, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. A deep scar traced a jagged path down his left cheek, a reminder of battles fought and won, and perhaps of the unrelenting nature of his rule. Below, the villagers moved like restless shadows, their murmurs weaving through the narrow streets and clustered homes. They dared not meet the Baron's eyes, but their discontent simmered just beneath the surface, fueled by the weight of impossible taxes and the cruel whims of those who claimed birthright over land and lives. The Baron's voice, when it came, was a chilling echo carried on the cold wind that swept through the fields. Order must be maintained, his captain declared, his voice cold and resolute. Any sign of rebellion will be crushed without mercy. Back at the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil rang out like a heartbeat. Aveline, her face streaked with soot and sweat, worked with a fierce intensity that belied the quiet around her. Sparks erupted and danced, momentarily illuminating her strong features and the piercing gray of her eyes. Each strike of the hammer was a testament to her resolve, a forging not only of steel but of purpose. She paused briefly, wiping a hand across her brow, and listened. The distant cries of villagers, the shuffle of hurried footsteps, and the occasional bark of a guard's command filtered through the open door. The rebellion was no longer a whisper. It was a gathering storm, Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp rap at the forge's entrance. A royal messenger, clad in the colors of the Baron's house, stepped inside, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. By order of Baron de Clermont, he began, unfurling a parchment that bore the seal of the noble house. All villagers are hereby commanded to surrender all weapons and submit to increased levies. Failure to comply will be met with severe punishment. Aveline's eyes narrowed. She met the messenger's gaze squarely, her voice steady and unwavering. The people have suffered enough. Your threats will not bend our spirits. The messenger's lips twitched, a flicker of disdain crossing his features before he masked it with practiced neutrality. Defiance is a dangerous path, Blacksmith. The Baron's patience wanes. Without another word, he turned and left, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving a charged silence in his wake. Word of the decree spread swiftly. Villagers gathered in hushed groups, their faces etched with fear and determination. Aveline moved among them, her presence a rallying force. She spoke of justice, of a future free from the yoke of oppression, her words igniting sparks of hope that threatened to blaze into a full rebellion. Yet as night fell and the forge's fire dimmed to embers, Aveline felt the weight of the coming storm settle upon her shoulders. The Baron's shadow loomed large, a relentless force of power, tradition, and unyielding control. To challenge it would demand more than courage. It would require sacrifice, strategy, and the unbreakable will to endure. In the quiet moments before dawn, she whispered a vow to the flickering flames, "I will forge a future from the fires of rebellion." The clash between the iron will of the Baron and the fiery spirit of the Blacksmith Queen had begun, and the fate of the village, perhaps the realm, hung in the balance. As the first light of day crept over the horizon, Aveline stood at the threshold of the forge, her gaze fixed beyond the village, toward the dark silhouette of the manor that symbolized all she fought against. The battle was no longer distant. It was at her doorstep, and she was ready to meet it head-on. And so, under the ever-watchful eyes of Baron de Clermont, the seeds of rebellion took root amidst the shadows, promising a story of defiance, steel, and the unyielding quest for justice that would echo through the ages. The forge's fires burned low, but within Aveline's heart, a blaze had been lit, fierce, relentless, and destined to change the course of history. But as the Baron tightened his grip, the question remained, would the Blacksmith Queen's flame be enough to shatter the cold iron of his dominion? The answer would come in the days ahead, in battles fought not only with blades but with hearts and wills unbroken. The morning sun had barely risen over the jagged horizon when Aveline made her way through the narrow dirt paths that wound between the clustered huts of her village. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the faint metallic tang that always lingered near the forge. Her hands still bore the grime and soot of an early morning at the anvil, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the distant tree line as if searching for something or someone. Jax had returned. The news had spread like wildfire the night before, carried on hushed whispers and cautious glances. Her childhood friend, now a seasoned fighter with scars earned in distant wars, stood waiting by the edge of the village, his lean form silhouetted against the morning light. The years had tempered his once boyish face into something hardened, but his eyes retained their quickness, the same alertness that had saved her more times than she could count. "Aveline," Jax greeted her with a nod, voice low but steady. "The nobles won't wait for us to be ready. We need to teach them to fight, to stand against swords and steel, not just pitchforks and stones." She nodded, a flicker of a smile breaking through the stoicism. "Then we begin at once." Together they moved to a clearing just beyond the village, a space where wild grasses bowed under the weight of morning dew. The peasants gathered hesitantly, clutching crude weapons or anything that could be wielded as one. Some were familiar faces, farmers, shepherds, blacksmiths. Others were newcomers drawn by the growing promise of rebellion. Their eyes held a mixture of hope and fear, uncertainty and fierce determination. Jax wasted no time. Archery first, he declared, producing a bow that had seen better days but was serviceable enough. He demonstrated the stance, the draw of the string, the aim. The twang of the bowstring echoed sharply through the air, followed by the satisfying thud of arrows embedding in the soft wood of a target. One by one, the peasants tried, their shots erratic at first but slowly gaining precision under Jack's careful tutelage. Aveline watched intently from the sidelines, her gaze flickering between the trainees and the weapons she had forged herself just days before. The blades gleamed dully in the sunlight, symbols of both defiance and hope. Her fingers itched to hold one, to feel the balance and weight that spoke of strength and survival. As the sun climbed higher, her resolve hardened. "We will not be crushed beneath the boot of Baron de Clermont," she told the gathered crowd during a brief pause. "Our fists may be untrained, but our hearts are steel. And steel, once forged, is unbreakable." Her words stirred the crowd, and murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered peasants. But it was not just her voice that would bolster the rebellion. From the shadows of the village, a figure emerged, Alice, the fiery herald whose reputation for stirring speeches had already begun to spread beyond the valley. Alice's arrival was like a flame sparked in dry tinder. Her red hair caught the light of the setting sun, and her green eyes blazed with passion. She mounted a rough-hewn platform in the village square and raised her voice, her words ringing out clear and true. "We fight not just for ourselves," Alice proclaimed, "but for our children, for the women silenced and beaten, for the men shackled by unjust laws. The nobles fear us 'cause we have the strength they lack the strength to dream of freedom." The crowd erupted in cheers, voices rising in a chorus of defiance and hope. Aveline felt a surge of pride and renewed energy. Here, in this humble village, a fire was being kindled that no reign of oppression could extinguish. Night fell, and the village gathered around flickering campfires. Aveline, Jax, and Alice huddled close, their faces half-shrouded in shadow. Maps and plans were spread before them, the flickering flames casting dancing images of strategies and possibilities. "The nobles will come hard," Jax warned, tracing lines on the map. "But if we stand united, if we fight with the strength of those who have nothing left to lose, we can hold them off." Aveline nodded, the weight of leadership settling firmly on her shoulders. "Then we will be ready. We forge not just weapons, but a future." As the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, the seeds of rebellion took deeper root. The Blacksmith Queen's cause was no longer a whisper in the shadows. It was a growing roar that promised to reshape the very foundations of their world. But even as hope blossomed, the shadows of doubt lingered at the edges of her heart. Would the peasants, untrained and untested, withstand the brutal might of the nobles? Could the fragile alliance forged this day hold against the tide of war to come? Only time would tell. For now, the forge burned bright, and with it, the promise of change. Aveline looked to the horizon one last time before the fire's glow faded. Tomorrow the fight truly began. The moon hung low over the village, casting a pale glow that barely penetrated the thick canopy of ancient oaks lining the narrow dirt road. Aveline crouched behind a gnarled root, her breath shallow and steady, her eyes sharp beneath the hood of her worn cloak. The night was still, save for the soft murmur of a nearby stream and the distant hoot of an owl. Somewhere up ahead, the clinking of metal and the low murmur of voices confirmed the presence of the noble caravan she sought. Beside her, Jax shifted quietly, his lean frame tense but controlled. "Are you certain this is the right moment?" he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the rustle of leaves. Aveline's grey eyes flickered with a fire that belied the calm in her tone. "The longer we wait, the stronger they grow. Tonight is the night we strike our blow." They crept forward, the torchlight from the caravan flickering like distant stars against the encroaching darkness. The wagons, heavy with iron weapons gleaming faintly even in the low light, were guarded by a handful of soldiers whose armor softly clanked with each restless movement. The air was thick with the scent of oiled leather and damp earth. Aveline's hands moved with practiced precision, her fingers deftly loosening the iron bindings securing the wagon's axles. Each click of shifting metal sent a jolt through her, yet her resolve hardened. She could almost hear the whispered hopes of her people riding on the edge of the coming dawn. Jack was kept watch, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. "Hurry," he urged silently, sensing the fragile balance of their plan. Suddenly, a twig snapped beneath a soldier's boot, and a harsh voice barked out. The caravan erupted into alarm, torches flaring as guards scrambled to investigate. Aveline and Jax melted back into the darkness, hearts pounding, breaths ragged but spirits unbroken. As the first light of morning broke, word of the sabotage spread like wildfire through the village. Noble weapons lay crippled, their power diminished in a single, decisive act. Villagers whispered in hushed tones, their eyes bright with a mixture of fear and hope. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Men exchanged glances thick with unspoken resolve. Aveline stood at the edge of the crowd, her soot-streaked face illuminated by the pale sun. She felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, the burden of their hopes resting heavily on her shoulders. Yet beneath it all was an unshakable flame, a promise that the time of silence and submission was over. But the victory was short-lived. The thunder of hooves shattered the morning calm as Baron de Clermont rode into the village, his polished armor gleaming ominously beneath the sun. His cold blue eyes scanned the gathered peasants with undisguised contempt. Behind him, knights and mercenaries formed a grim procession, their presence a stark reminder of the brutal power they wielded. The villagers recoiled, fear rippling through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Children vanished behind shuttered doors. The elderly lowered their heads in silent prayer. Only Aveline met the Baron's gaze head-on, her defiance a silent challenge. "You will pay for this insolence," the Baron's voice rang out, cold and commanding. "This rebellion ends before it begins." That night, the village gathered once more, the crackling fire casting long shadows on walls, scarred by the day's events. Aveline stood before them, her hammer raised high. "They may have weapons," she declared, "but we have the will to fight. Tonight, we forge not only steel but our future." Her words ignited a fire within the hearts of her people. The rhythmic pounding of hammer on anvil echoed through the village, a clarion call to arms that promised resistance, sacrifice, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The first spark had been struck, and though the path ahead was shrouded in darkness, Aveline knew the flames of rebellion would burn brighter than ever before. As the embers glowed and the night deepened, a silent vow was made beneath the stars, no matter the cost. The blacksmith queen would lead her people through the fire to freedom. The forge glowed in the fading light, embers casting a fiery glow against the rough stone walls. Aveline's hands moved with practiced precision, the rhythmic pounding of the hammer on steel a steady heartbeat in the growing chaos around her. Sparks danced like fleeting hopes, scattered into the cool air, each strike a testament to her unwavering resolve. Yet beneath the strength of her blows, a subtle tremor lingered, one born not from fatigue, but from the weight pressing heavily upon her spirit. Jack stood nearby, arms crossed, his lean frame tense as his sharp eyes flicked from the glowing blade to the restless crowd gathered, just beyond the forge's threshold. Murmurs of discontent and heated debate floated through the air, the rebels' unity fraying at the edges. The strain of leadership was beginning to show in even the most steadfast of hearts. "They question your decisions," Jax said quietly, stepping closer. His voice was low but carried the weight of concern. "Some doubt we can win this fight." Aveline did not pause her work. "Doubt is a poison," she replied, her voice steady, but so is complacency. "They must be reminded why we fight." Jax nodded, but the lines of worry deepened on his weathered face. "And what of your own heart, Aveline? Can you carry this burden alone?" She hesitated, the hammer's rhythm faltering for a heartbeat. The forge's heat was suffocating, yet the chill in her bones was colder still. "I must," she answered, though the certainty felt brittle. As evening fell, Liz's voice rose in a fiery crescendo beneath the twilight sky. From the makeshift stage, her passionate words ignited the restless crowd, her red hair aflame against the darkening horizon. "We are not mere peasants," she proclaimed, "but the hammer that will shatter our chains." Aveline watched from the sidelines, her grey eyes reflecting the flickering torchlight. Pride swelled in her chest at the sight of Liz's unyielding spirit, yet beneath it lay a current of unease. The rebellion's flame burned bright, but the winds of discord whispered through their ranks. Later, beside a flickering campfire, Aveline and Jax sat close, their faces etched by firelight and fatigue. The night was thick with unspoken fears. "The factions grow restless," Jax murmured. "Some challenge your authority, others question our strategy. They do not see the whole path," Aveline replied, her voice tight. "But if I falter, everything falls apart." Jax met her gaze, his eyes searching. "You do not have to carry this alone. We are your strength, but even steel bends under too much strain." Aveline's jaw clenched. "I am not ready to bend. Not yet." The conversation lingered in the cool night air, a fragile balance of trust and tension. When the camp finally settled, Aveline returned to the forge. The silence enveloped her, broken only by the soft hiss of cooling steel. She sat heavily on the worn bench, the weight of unseen crowns pressing down on her shoulders. Shadows danced across soot-streaked walls as she traced a finger over the blade. She had just finished a symbol of their fight, yet also a reminder of the sacrifices demanded. Her heart ached with self-doubt, a quiet voice whispering fears of failure and loss. Yet beneath it all, the fire within refused to dim. She was the blacksmith queen in waiting, forged not only by steel but by the bonds of fire that bound her to her people and her cause. Tomorrow would bring new trials. But tonight, in the solitude of her forge, Aveline steeled herself against the coming storm, determined to hold fast to the fragile hope that flickered in the darkness. And so the bonds of fire were forged not only in metal but in the hearts of those who dared to dream of freedom. The night deepened, and with it, the promise of a dawn that might yet break through the shadows. The heavy drapes of the chamber muffled the distant clatter of armored footsteps in the grand hall beyond. Lady Margaret sat with a poised elegance that belied the turmoil beneath her composed exterior. The flickering candlelight danced across the delicate parchment she unfolded, revealing hastily sketched maps and cryptic notes penned in a hurried hand. Across from her, Aveline leaned forward, her piercing grey eyes narrowing as she absorbed every detail. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, the quiet danger of this secret meeting palpable in the shadows. "These are the movements reported within the Baron's court," Lady Margaret whispered, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "They plan to marshal forces at dawn. If we do not act swiftly, the rebellion will be crushed before it truly begins." Aveline's fist clenched, the leather of her glove creaking softly. The knowledge was both a boon and a burden, an opportunity wrapped in peril. "How can we be sure you aren't leading us into a trap?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Your loyalty to the nobles is known." Margaret's hazel eyes glistened with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I am a daughter of the court, yes, but I see the cruelty and the suffering it inflicts. I cannot stand by while innocent lives are ground beneath their heels. I risk everything by aiding you." The weight of her words settled heavily upon the room. Aveline's mind raced, trusting a noblewoman was a gamble that could cost them dearly, yet such intelligence was invaluable. "We will take what you offer, but we watch closely, Margaret. One misstep and this alliance ends." Outside, the village lay swathed in darkness, the only light the faint glow of forge fires and flickering torches carried by sentries. At the forge, Aveline paused her hammering, the metallic ring echoing in the quiet night. The warmth of molten steel contrasted starkly with the cold unease settling in her chest. Could a noblewoman truly stand with them? Or was this another trap woven by the Baron's cunning? Jacques, ever vigilant, paced the rebel camp's tent, his lean frame tense beneath the worn leather of his jerkin. Elise stood nearby, her fiery red hair a vivid slash against the muted canvas, her green eyes bright with determination yet shadowed by doubt. A messenger arrived abruptly, breathless and furtive, bearing a sealed note from Lady Margaret. The room hushed as Jacques broke the wax seal, scanning the words quickly. Margaret warns of an impending raid on the eastern farms. Jacques announced, voice low but urgent. We must prepare ambushes. Elise nodded, stepping forward. This news could turn the tide if we can trust it. The rebel leaders shared glances, a mixture of hope and suspicion tightening their features. Trust was a fragile currency in these desperate times. Late that night, beneath a sky thick with stars, Aveline met Lady Margaret again in the secret refuge of the garden behind the manor. The air was cool and damp, redolent with the scent of wet earth and blooming nightshade. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper as she revealed the personal sacrifices she made to aid the rebellion. I am watched, she confessed. Every step I take risks exposure. Should the Baron discover my betrayal, death will be swift and certain. Aveline reached out, her soot-streaked hand brushing Margaret's gloved fingers. Your courage is rare, and it gives us strength. But know this, if you betray us, the consequences will be dire. Margaret met her gaze steadily. I have no desire to see your cause fail. As they parted, the weight of their fragile alliance settled over them both. The rebellion was no longer a simple fight of peasants against nobles. It was a complex web of shifting loyalties and secret dangers. In the forge the next dawn, Aveline hammered steadily, the clang of steel a steady heartbeat in the stillness. Her mind churned with doubts and determination. The shadows of betrayal loomed close, yet the fire within her burned brighter. She would wield this new alliance carefully, forging hope from uncertainty, steel from shadows. The coming days would test not only their strength, but the very nature of trust in a world where enemies wore the faces of friends. The Blacksmith Queen's path was fraught with peril, and every secret whispered in the shadows could either save them or shatter their fragile dream of freedom. As the sun rose, casting long golden beams across the village, Aveline stood tall, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the fate of their rebellion would be decided. The game of shadows had begun, and she was determined to emerge victorious. But beneath her fierce resolve, a single question burned. Could trust truly be forged in the fires of deceit? And with that haunting question, leaving the reader poised on the edge of revelation and danger, eager to turn the page to the next chapter of rebellion and secrets. The first light of dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, casting a pale, sickly glow on the ravaged landscape. The rebel village that had once thrummed with life was now a grim tableau of destruction and death. Plumes of smoke curled lazily upwards from the blackened remnants of wooden homes, their skeletal frames silhouetted starkly against the waking sky. The acrid scent of burning wood mingled with the heavier, more dreadful odors of charred flesh and spilled blood, choking the air and making the morning chill even harder to bear. Aveline stood at the edge of the village, her boots sinking slightly into the ash-strewn earth. The soot from the forge clung stubbornly to her skin, mingling with the grime and tears that streaked her face. Her piercing grey eyes scanned the devastation, each ruined hut and lifeless form a cruel testament to the violence wrought by Baron de Clermont's forces. The horror that unfolded before her struck deep into her heart, yet beneath the raw pain, a fierce ember of resolve began to glow. She moved through the wreckage, her footsteps faltering as she came upon the body of a child. The small figure lay tangled among the rubble, a tangle of dark hair matted with soot and dust. Aveline knelt, her calloused hands trembling as she brushed dirt from the child's face. The stillness was suffocating, the silence broken only by the distant crackle of dying fires and the low murmur of survivors beginning to stir. Around her, the villagers emerged from hiding, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. Mothers clutched broken children, men stared blankly at the carnage, and the elderly wept openly for the lost. Jax appeared at her side, his lean frame tense but controlled. His quick eyes swept the scene, noting the wounded, the dead, and the few who remained unscathed. "We must move quickly," he urged quietly. "There may be more coming." Aveline nodded, rising to her feet. Her voice, steady but heavy with grief, carried over the hushed crowd. "This is the price of our defiance," she said, "but it is not the end. We will honor those lost by fighting harder, by forging a future where such cruelty cannot thrive." The survivors began to organize, tending to the wounded and salvaging what they could from the wreckage. The sky above darkened with the approach of storm clouds, mirroring the tumultuous emotions roiling within the rebel camp. Elise moved among the people, her fiery red hair a beacon amidst the despair. She gathered them as twilight fell, her voice rising in passionate speech that rekindled a flicker of hope amid the ashes. "We stand at a crossroads," Elise declared, her green eyes blazing. "They sought to break our spirit, to silence our cry for justice. But we are not defeated. We are the steel forged in fire, unyielding and strong. We are the Blacksmith Queen's people, and we will rise." Her words ignited a fierce determination among the rebels, binding them together in shared purpose despite the staggering losses. Aveline felt the weight of leadership settle more heavily upon her shoulders, the cost of rebellion laid bare before her. Yet within that burden, she found a renewed strength, a steel forged not just in the fires of the forge, but in the crucible of sacrifice and hope. As night enveloped the village, the flickering flames of campfires cast long shadows on the faces of those who remained. Whispers of the fallen mingled with vows of vengeance and justice, carrying into the dark like the steady beat of a hammer on anvil. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but the Blacksmith Queen and her people would walk it together, unbroken and undeterred. The massacre was more than a tragedy. It was a rallying cry. The rebellion would endure, and from the ashes of loss would rise a crown forged in steel and sacrifice. But the question lingered in every heart: how many more would pay the price before freedom could be won? And so the fire of rebellion burned brighter still, tempered by grief, but unextinguished. The camp lay shrouded in an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of a fire struggling against the chill night air. Aveline's footsteps echoed softly on the hard-packed earth as she made her way through the cluster of tents, her mind a tempest of suspicion and dread. Word had spread like wildfire, betrayal had found its way into their midst. The very foundation of the rebellion trembled under the weight of deceit. Inside the largest tent, a grim gathering awaited her, the core leaders of the rebellion, faces drawn tight with worry. Jax stood near the entrance, his lean frame rigid, eyes sharp as he scanned the perimeter beyond. Elise stood by the firelight, her green eyes bright but shadowed with anxiety, her fiery spirit barely contained. "Aveline," Jax greeted quietly, his voice low and steady despite the tension. "We've uncovered the traitor." Aveline nodded, her grey eyes hardening. "Bring them in. Let us end this tonight." Moments later, the accused was led inside, a man once trusted, a friend to many, now shackled by the weight of his treachery. His face was pale, sweat beading on his brow as he met Aveline's piercing gaze. "Why?" she demanded, voice sharp but controlled. "Why betray us?" The traitor's eyes flickered with a mixture of fear and defiance. The nobles offered gold, safety. "I had no choice." Aveline's heart clenched. The cost of rebellion was never just blood and steel. It was trust, fragile and precious. Outside, Jax paced the perimeter, the shadows of the forest pressing close as if to swallow him whole. Memories of distant wars haunted his steps, the screams, the loss, the betrayal. Now that same shadow had crept into their sanctuary. His grip tightened on his bow, every sense alert to the slightest disturbance. In the village square, Elise stood before a crowd rattled by fear and doubt. Her voice rang clear and strong, weaving hope through the murmurs of despair. "We will not falter. This betrayal is a wound, but it will not be our undoing. Stand with me, stand with Aveline. Our cause is just and our spirit unbreakable." Her words sparked flickers of courage, though the undercurrent of suspicion lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. Meanwhile, in a shadowed chamber away from prying eyes, Lady Margaret met with Aveline. Their alliance was tentative, built on necessity and fraught with unspoken questions. "This betrayal," Margaret whispered, "shows how precarious your position is. You must be cautious whom you trust, even among your closest." Aveline met her gaze steadily. "And yet, without trust, we are nothing. We must find a way to mend what has been broken, or all will be lost." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, the weight of noble expectations and personal convictions pressing down on her. As night deepened, the rebellion's heart beat with uncertainty. The shadows of betrayal had cast a pall over their cause, threatening to unravel the fragile threads of unity they had so painstakingly woven. Yet, in Aveline's unwavering resolve, a beacon flickered, a promise that from these darkest moments, strength and solidarity could yet be forged anew. The path ahead was perilous, with enemies seen and unseen. But the Blacksmith Queen's fire burned still, tempered by hardship, and ready to ignite the rebellion's indomitable spirit once more. The dawn would bring new trials, but also the chance for redemption and hope. And as Aveline stood beneath the cold stars, she vowed silently, no shadow, no betrayal, could extinguish the flame of freedom they fought to kindle. With her heart steeled and her mind sharp, she prepared to face the fractures within and the storm beyond, a leader forged not just by steel, but by the unyielding will to rise above the darkness. The forge's heat pressed close, the air thick with the scent of molten metal and smoke. Aveline stood at her anvil, muscles taut as she drove her hammer down upon the glowing steel. Each resounding clang echoed like a heartbeat in the quiet night, a relentless rhythm that matched the turmoil within her soul. The village had long since fallen silent, save for the occasional crackle of fire or the distant howl of a night wind. But Aveline's world was consumed by the steady beat of her hammer and the weight of the decisions that pressed upon her like the heavy bellows, stoking the forge's flames. Her arms moved with practiced precision, shaping the raw metal into blades and arrowheads, tools of war born from fire and sweat. Yet beneath the determination that drove her hands, a shadow of doubt gnawed at her spirit. What cost would this rebellion claim? How many lives would be lost before freedom could be won? The faces of those she led, the villagers who trusted her to lead them against the ruthless Baron de Clermont, haunted her thoughts. She had become more than a blacksmith's daughter. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance. But the crown she bore was invisible and heavy. Jack's footsteps echoed softly as he approached the forge, his lean form silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. "Aveline," he said quietly, wiping soot from his brow, "we must speak." The men grow restless, and the Baron's forces tighten their grip. She nodded, setting her hammer down and wiping her hands on her leather apron. "I know," she replied, voice low but firm. "Tonight we prepare. Tomorrow we strike again." They moved to a rough-hewn table strewn with maps and crude sketches of the noble stronghold. Jack has traced a finger along the routes, outlining possible approaches and retreats. The weight of strategy settled over them, a heavy shroud that neither could fully lift. "If we fail," Jack said, eyes meeting hers with a rare flicker of vulnerability, "it will mean the end of everything we've fought for." Aveline's gaze hardened. "Then we must not fail, not now, not ever." Outside, the village stirred as Elise stood atop a makeshift platform, her voice rising in a fiery speech that cut through the night's chill. Her words carried the raw passion of one who had suffered and survived noble cruelty, igniting the hearts of those who listened. "We fight not just for ourselves," she declared, "but for those yet unborn. For justice, for freedom, for a future where no child will tremble beneath the boot of tyranny." Cheers erupted, a swelling tide of hope that momentarily eased the burdens pressing on Aveline's chest. She stepped outside, watching the flames of torches dance in the eyes of her people. their faces roughened by toil and hardship, but a light with newfound courage reminded her why she must endure. Later, beneath the quiet shadows of the village chapel, Father Benoti sat with Aveline, his weathered hands folded in his lap. "The path you walk is fraught with peril," he said softly. "But remember, even the darkest night must yield to dawn." She closed her eyes, drawing strength from his words, yet feeling the deep ache of loneliness that leadership exacted. "How do I carry their hopes when my own heart falters?" He smiled gently. "By forging your spirit as you do your steel, with fire, with patience, and with unwavering resolve." As dawn crept over the horizon, casting pale light upon the village, Aveline returned to her forge. The crown of steel she sought to shape was not merely a symbol. It was the embodiment of sacrifice and the promise of change. With every strike, she forged not only weapons, but the future of her people, a future built on the fierce determination that would carry them through the trials yet to come. The weight of the crown pressed down, but Aveline bore it with the strength of a queen born from fire and struggle, ready to lead her rebellion toward the uncertain dawn. The moon hung low and silver over the dense woods bordering the village, casting long, trembling shadows among the ancient pines. Aveline's breath came in quiet, measured gusts, the chill night air biting at her soot-streaked face as she moved swiftly through the underbrush. She paused beside a moss-covered stone, her piercing gray eyes scanning the darkness. From the silence emerged a figure, tall and lean, the faint glint of chainmail catching the moonlight. Sir Henry. Henry's expression was a turbulent sea of emotions, conflict, longing, and an unspoken fear. "Aveline," he whispered, voice thick with restraint, "this path you lead, it is perilous. For you, for me, for all who follow your flame." She met his gaze, the flicker of the fire from her forge echoing in her eyes. "And yet, it is the only path to justice, Henry. Must duty forever bind us to chains?" The knight's hands clenched and unclenched, the weight of his noble birth pressing heavily upon his shoulders. "My heart is torn between honor to my class and the truth I see in your cause and in you." Aveline's pulse quickened. The forbidden nature of their meeting, the risk of discovery, was a silent shadow between them. "We stand at a crossroads, Henry. Our choices define not only ourselves but the future of this land." Their meetings became secret and fraught with tension. Beneath the shroud of night, words of love intertwined with whispered strategies. Henry shared glimpses of the noble court's machinations, while Aveline revealed the resolve and pain driving the rebellion. Yet each encounter edged closer to peril, the fragile thread of trust stretched taut. Back in the village, the forge blazed late into the night. The rhythmic pounding of hammer against steel was a steady drumbeat to Aveline's thoughts, each strike a vow to her people, and to the uncertain love that warmed her from within. Under the glow, her face bore the marks of strength and vulnerability, a queen in the making, yet still a woman bound by hope and fear. Jax, ever watchful, sensed the change in Aveline. From the shadows of the village outskirts, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The loyalty that had bound him to Aveline since childhood now wrestled with doubt. "Aveline," he muttered under his breath one evening, cloaked in the dark, "be wary of hearts that beat with divided loyalties." In council chambers lit by flickering candles, rebel leaders debated fiercely. Plans to strike the nobles were laid bare, strategies weighed with the heavy knowledge of lives at stake. Yet beneath the surface, Aveline's secret weighed upon her, a delicate balance between love and war. Henry's name was a whisper only she dared to speak aloud. The forbidden romance was a fragile bloom amid the thorns of rebellion. Each stolen moment was a risk, each shared glance a step closer to discovery. Yet in their union lay a potent hope, a bridge between worlds long divided. Could love, born in shadows and forged in steel, survive the coming storm? As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Aveline stood at the forge's threshold, the crown of steel still a distant dream. Her heart beat fiercely, torn between the fire of rebellion and the tender ache of a noble heart divided. The path ahead was uncertain, but her resolve remained unbroken with love and steel entwined. She would face whatever dawn might bring. The village hall was thick with tension, the air heavy and charged as voices rose and fell in heated debate. Aveline stood at the center, her piercing grey eyes scanning the room filled with rough-hewn men and women leaders of various factions within the rebellion. Their faces were lined with hardship, their voices sharp with frustration and fear. The flickering torchlight cast deep shadows on the stone walls, mirroring the darkness that threatened to unravel their fragile alliance. "We cannot afford this division," Aveline said firmly, stepping forward to silence an argument spiraling out of control. "The nobles wait for us to break ourselves apart. They will crush us if we do not stand united." A grizzled man with a scar across his cheek spat on the floor. "Easy for you to say, Blacksmith Queen. Some of us don't trust your plans. You think a crown forged from weapons will lead us to victory." Jax moved to her side, his lean frame radiating calm authority. "We all want freedom," he said quietly, "but we must choose our battles wisely. Disagreements will destroy us faster than any noble sword." The room fell into uneasy silence. Aveline's gaze softened as she looked around, recognizing the wariness behind the anger. "We fight for the same dream. Let us find a way to make it real together." Later, as dawn broke over the village, the training fields came alive with the sounds of clashing wooden swords and shouted commands. Jax directed small groups of peasants, many of whom had never held a weapon before. Their breath formed clouds in the cold morning air, muscles straining with each swing and parry. Aveline moved among them, her soot-streaked face set with fierce determination. "Remember," she told a young man struggling to keep pace, "steel is not just a weapon. It is a symbol of our strength and our will to be free." The sun climbed higher, casting a pale light over the gathered rebels. Elise stood on a makeshift platform in the village square, her red hair a fiery banner against the grey sky. Her voice rang out clear and passionate as she addressed the crowd. "We fight not only for our lives, but for the future of our children, for the women who have been silenced, and for the men who have been broken. This rebellion is our chance to forge a new world, one where justice is not a crown worn by the few, but a right shared by all." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Faces once hardened by despair now glimmered with hope. Aveline caught Jack's eye, a shared spark of resolve passing between them. In a quiet chamber away from the noise, Lady Margaret leaned close to Aveline, speaking in hushed tones. "The Baron's forces are gathering faster than we feared. There is talk of mercenaries and reinforcements. You must prepare for a storm unlike any before." Aveline studied the noblewoman's conflicted expression. "Why help us?" "Because not all crowns are forged in cruelty," Margaret replied, her voice trembling with urgency. "And because I believe in what you represent, a chance for change. But be warned, the path ahead is perilous." Night fell again, but the fire in Aveline's heart burned brighter than ever. The rebellion was no longer just a flicker. It was a gathering storm. Yet beneath the strength and unity, fragile tensions simmered, reminders that the greatest battles were not only against the nobles, but within their own ranks. As she prepared to face the coming war, Aveline knew the weight of leadership was not just in rallying swords, but in holding together the hearts and hopes of her people. The forge had taught her that steel must be tempered by fire to hold its strength. So too must the rebellion be tempered by unity to survive the storm. The night whispered of challenges ahead, but Aveline's resolve was unshaken. The Blacksmith Queen would not falter, not while the crown of steel waited to be claimed, and the dream of freedom burned in every rebel's heart. And yet, as the wind howled outside the village walls, a single question lingered in the shadows. Could the fragile unity forged in this gathering storm withstand the tempest that was coming? The answer would be written in blood and steel on the fields of battle yet to come. The stone walls of the village church bore the weight of centuries, their cold surfaces absorbing the whispered prayers and whispered hopes of generations long past. Inside, the flickering candlelight danced with shadows, casting a soft glow on the worn altar and the simple wooden pews. Father Benoît sat quietly near the front, his thin grey hair catching the light as he folded his hands in silent contemplation. The heavy scent of beeswax and ancient incense lingered in the air, mingling with the faint chill that seeped from the stone beneath the floorboards. Aveline entered the sanctuary with measured steps, her suit's streaked face drawn and wary but resolute. The forge's heat still clung faintly to her skin, a reminder of the unyielding fire that fueled her spirit. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, her piercing grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames as she approached the priest. "Father," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of countless burdens, "I find myself torn between hope and despair. The men and women look to me as their leader, yet I fear I may falter under the weight of their trust." Father Benoît regarded her with a profound kindness, the lines etched across his weathered face softening as he gestured to the pew beside him. "Sit with me, Aveline. You carry the hopes of many, yes, but you are not alone in this burden. The path you walk is fraught with peril, yet it is also illuminated by the light of justice and faith." She sank onto the wooden bench, the rough grain pressing into her palms. The nobles tighten their grip. The baron's men grow bolder, more ruthless. Each day brings new losses, and I fear the cost will be too great. Father Benoît nodded slowly. Sacrifice is the price of change, but it must be measured and borne with conviction. Remember, the strength of steel comes not only from fire but from the hands that shape it. You are the hand that forges a new future. Outside the church, night had fallen, and the village was cloaked in darkness. Father Benoît moved quietly through the narrow streets, making his way to a secluded spot near the edge of the village where Jacques waited in the shadows. The soldier's lean figure was barely visible beneath his cloak, his keen eyes scanning the moonlit landscape. The priest extended a small, folded parchment toward Jacques. "This was slipped to me by a sympathetic servant within the baron's household. It details troop movements and plans for the coming days." Jacques accepted the parchment with a nod, the weight of the information pressing upon him as heavily as any weapon. "This will give us the edge we need," he said in a low voice. "The rebels must be ready." Father Benoît placed a reassuring hand on Jacques' shoulder. "Faith and strategy must walk hand in hand if we are to prevail." Back inside the church, Aveline knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tightly as she sought guidance from the quiet sanctuary. The gentle light filtered through stained glass, painting her face with hues of crimson and gold. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft rustle of her breath and the distant murmurs of the village night. Her thoughts drifted to the faces of those who had trusted her, the blacksmith apprentices, the farmers turned fighters, the women rallying with fierce hope. Each was a spark in the growing flame of rebellion, and she was the anvil upon which their destiny was to be forged. The following morning, Father Benoît addressed a gathering of villagers inside the church nave. His voice, though aged, carried a steady authority that resonated with the crowd. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "we stand at a crossroads where faith and courage must unite. The path before us is fraught with hardship, but our cause is just. We fight not only for ourselves, but for the generations yet unborn. Let the flame of hope burn bright within your hearts." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, eyes shining with renewed determination. The priest's words wove a tapestry of spiritual strength and communal resolve, binding the rebels together in a fragile yet unbreakable bond. Aveline watched from the shadows, the weight of her crown invisible but no less real. The counsel she received from Father Benoît was a balm to her weary soul, and a beacon guiding her through the gathering storm. With each day, the rebellion grew not only in number but in spirit, tempered by faith and fired by the unyielding will of those who dared to dream of freedom. As the sun rose over the village, casting sharp light on the thatched roofs and muddy streets, Aveline knew the true battle was yet to come. But in the quiet strength of the priest's counsel, she found the courage to face it head-on, ready to forge a future from the fires of rebellion and the enduring hope of justice. The forge awaited her hands once more, but the weight of the crown, though unseen, pressed heavier than ever. Yet beneath that weight, a fierce determination burned brighter, fueled by the whispers of faith and the promise of a new dawn. And so, with Father Benot's guidance echoing in her heart, Aveline stepped forward into the uncertain light of the coming days, the blacksmith queen in the making. Her story still unfolding like the first sparks from the anvil. The forge was alive with the steady rhythm of hammer striking steel, each clang sending a pulse through the chilled air of the workshop. The warm glow of the fire cast flickering shadows on the soot-streaked walls, illuminating the faces of those gathered around the anvil. At the center stood Aveline, her dark hair tied back tightly, eyes sharp and unyielding as the blade she shaped beneath her skilled hands. Beside her, Marcel, the eager apprentice, gripped the hammer with youthful determination, sweat mingling with the grime on his face as he mirrored her movements with careful focus. "Strike here," Aveline instructed, her voice steady but patient. "Feel the metal. It has a will of its own. You must listen, or it will break beneath your hand." Marcel nodded, swallowing his nerves. The task was daunting, yet he felt a fierce pride kindling inside him, fed by the weight of the moment. This was more than mere blacksmithing, it was the forging of hope itself. Each weapon shaped in this humble workshop carried the dreams and defiance of those who refused to bow beneath the yoke of the nobility. Outside the forge, Jacques paced with practiced vigilance, inspecting the weapons lined up on the rough wooden tables. His weathered face betrayed the strain of countless battles, but his eyes held a spark of renewed courage as he passed judgment on their craftsmanship. Nearby, Aliz's voice rose in passionate cadence, rallying a growing crowd of villagers. Her fiery speeches had become the heartbeat of the rebellion, stirring the hearts of the wary and the oppressed alike. Inside, Aveline paused, wiping the sweat from her brow. She looked down at the blade resting on the anvil, its surface still hot and glowing faintly. Turning to Marcel, she spoke softly, her grey eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "These weapons we forge," she said, "are not just tools of war. They are symbols of our struggle, our unity, and our promise to each other. When you hold this blade, remember who it protects and why it exists." Marcel's gaze dropped to the steel, a solemn understanding settling over him. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, heavier than any hammer he had lifted. Yet beneath that burden lay a fierce determination to wield this power with honor. The hours stretched on as the apprentices worked late into the night, the clang of hammers and the roar of the fire forging not just weapons, but a bond between mentor and student, between past and future. The forge was a sanctuary, a beacon in the darkness, where the rebellion spirit was tempered and strengthened. Aveline moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement, her presence a steady flame in the uncertain times. She knew that the road ahead would be perilous, that the battles to come would test every ounce of their resolve. But here, in this humble workshop, something vital was taking shape, a legacy of resistance carried forward by hands eager to fight not just for survival, but for a new dawn. As the night deepened, the group gathered around the anvil once more, the freshly forged weapons resting at their feet like silent promises. Outside, the village settled into a restless quiet, the distant sounds of night creatures mingling with the faint murmur of whispered plans and guarded hopes. Aveline's eyes scanned the faces around her, young, old, battle-worn, and hopeful. She saw in them the reflection of her own journey, the transformation from a blacksmith's daughter to a leader of a people yearning for freedom. The crown she would someday wear was still far away, but tonight the seeds of that future were sown in steel and spirit. "Rest now," she said, voice soft but resolute. "Tomorrow we forge ahead together." And with that, the forge's fire burned on, a steadfast light in the gathering darkness, carrying the promise of weapons forged not just from metal, but from the unbreakable will of a people united. The heavy velvet curtains muffled the sounds of the bustling noble court beyond, creating a sanctuary of shadows in the secluded chamber. Lady Margaret stood by a small wooden table, her fingers deftly unfolding a slender parchment sealed with crimson wax. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the walls, illuminating her sharp hazel eyes that flickered with a mixture of fear and resolve. She glanced over her shoulder, the faint clatter of distant footsteps prompting her to lower her voice to a whisper. "The Baron's plans grow darker by the day," she murmured, passing the letter to a servant cloaked in the folds of a dark hood. "We must move swiftly." The servant nodded silently, slipping away into the labyrinthine corridors, the soft rustle of fabric the only trace of their passage. Alone again, Margaret's gaze hardened. Each secret act of defiance chipped away at the gilded cage she inhabited. But the risk was immense. Discovery would mean disgrace at best, death at worst. She recalled the banquet earlier that evening. The grand hall had been ablaze with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats and rich wine. Lords and ladies draped in sumptuous silks and velvets laughed and whispered beneath glittering chandeliers. Baron de Clermont sat at the head of the table, his scarred face set in a grim mask of authority. His cold blue eyes swept the room as he pronounced his intent to crush the rebellion with unrelenting force. Margaret had smiled politely, nodding in agreement, all the while her mind raced with subtle plans to undermine his resolve. Every word she spoke was measured, every gesture controlled. The delicate dance of court intrigue was a deadly game she had learned well, but tonight the stakes felt higher than ever. Later, under the cover of darkness, she slipped away to the manor's hidden garden. The night air was cool and fragrant with blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the turmoil in her heart. Kneeling behind a cluster of rose bushes, she pulled from her cloak a folded letter, its contents a dangerous secret that could unravel the rebel cause if intercepted. With trembling hands she struck a match, the small flame sputtering to life. She pressed it to the edge of the parchment, watching as the paper curled and blackened, the scent of burning ink rising in the stillness. The fire's glow reflected in her eyes, fierce and unyielding. For their safety, she whispered to the night, her voice barely audible. And for hope. In the days that followed, Margaret's covert efforts bore fruit. She intercepted messages, delayed shipments of weapons, and subtly questioned loyal knights to sow seeds of doubt. Each small victory emboldened the rebels, though the shadow of discovery loomed ever closer. One evening, in a narrow corridor hidden from prying eyes, Margaret met with Aveline. The blacksmith queen's soot-streaked face was a stark contrast to the noble woman's refined appearance, yet their shared resolve bridged worlds. "Your courage is a beacon," Aveline said quietly, gripping Margaret's hands. "Without you, many of these victories would be impossible." Margaret's smile was tinged with sadness. "I walk a dangerous path," she confessed. "But if the old order must fall, then I will help see it done no matter the cost." Their alliance was fragile, built on whispered promises and shared secrets, yet it symbolized a new possibility. That change might come not only through rebellion, but also through the cracks within the old guard. Jax awoke with a start, the cold dampness of the night air biting at his skin beneath the threadbare blanket. The camp was silent except for the distant hoot of an owl and the crackling of a dying fire. Yet in his mind, the clamor of war thundered relentlessly, the clash of steel, the cries of men caught in battle, the suffocating smoke that choked his lungs. His breath came in ragged gasps, beads of sweat matted his hair against his forehead. He pressed his hand to his chest, willing his heart to slow its frantic rhythm. Around him the world was still, but within him the ghosts of distant conflicts stirred with cruel persistence. For years Jax had fought in faraway wars, battles that left scars deeper than any wound of flesh. He had learned how to track enemies through dense forests, how to shoot an arrow with deadly precision, and how to survive when all hope seemed lost. Yet the true fight was not against the enemy's blade, but against the memories that haunted his nights and clouded his days. The faces of fallen comrades flickered like shadows at the edge of his vision, their whispered voices a constant reminder of the cost of violence. Today the war was different. This was not a distant kingdom's battle, but a struggle for the very soul of his homeland. Beside him stood Aveline, the blacksmith queen, whose fiery spirit and unyielding resolve had rekindled the hope of their people. Jax admired her strength, but he also carried his doubts silently, fearing that the weight of command might crush her as it had nearly crushed him. In the dim light of the forge, the orange glow of the fire cast flickering shadows on the stone walls. Jax found himself there, drawn to the familiar scent of burning coal and molten metal. Aveline was already at work, hammering a glowing blade with rhythmic strikes that sang through the night. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes sharp and focused, but when she noticed Jax, a gentle smile softened her features. "You reawake early," she said softly, wiping sweat from her brow. Jax nodded, his voice hoarse. "The memories came again. I could not find rest." She laid down her hammer and approached, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You carry more than arrows and tactics, friend. But you are not alone." Her words were a balm, yet the ache remained. Jax looked away, ashamed of the vulnerability he rarely showed. "I fear my past may weaken us. The enemy is not only without but within me." Aveline's eyes held fierce understanding. "Your strength is not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it. We all have wounds. Together, we heal." Later that morning, the rebel council gathered in the village hall, the air thick with smoke and the murmur of anxious voices. Plans were drawn and redrawn on crude maps, and strategies debated with fervor. Jax stood among the leaders, his gaze flickering nervously as he prepared to speak. When his turn came, he cleared his throat, the weight of past failures pressing down. "We must strike before the nobles can reinforce their garrisons," he said, voice steady but edged with tension. "A swift attack in the eastern woods will catch them unprepared." A murmur of assent rippled through the room, but Jax saw doubt shadow some faces. He pressed on, determined to prove his worth despite the turmoil within. "We cannot afford hesitation. Our people depend on us." After the meeting, Father Benoti found Jax alone by the chapel's worn wooden doors. The priest's kindly eyes softened as he beckoned Jax inside. The chapel was dim, lit only by the flicker of candles that cast long shadows on the stone walls. The scent of incense mingled with the cool air, creating a space of quiet refuge. Father Benot's voice was gentle as he spoke of faith and forgiveness, of the strength found in confession and acceptance. "You carry heavy burdens, Jax," the priest said, placing a reassuring hand over his. "But even the strongest warrior needs rest for his spirit. You are part of a greater cause, and your courage inspires others more than you know." Jax felt tears prick at his eyes, a release long denied. He nodded slowly, the priest's words planting a seed of hope amid the darkness. The days that followed tested Jax anew. Training drills, scouting missions, and the relentless pace of rebellion left little room for respite. Yet with each challenge, he found his resolve growing stronger, bolstered by the loyalty of comrades and the unwavering leadership of Aveline. One evening, as twilight deepened over the village, Jack stood watching the horizon. The sky blazed with hues of purple and gold, the promise of dawn mingling with the shadows of night. He tightened his grip on his bow, a symbol of both his skill and his commitment. In that moment, Jax understood that the true battle was not only against the nobles, but against the fears that threatened to undo them from within. With courage born of pain and hope, he would stand beside Aveline, ready to face whatever storms lay ahead. As the stars began to pierce the velvet sky, the rebel camp settled into uneasy rest. But for Jax, the echoes of war would continue to whisper, a constant reminder of the sacrifices demanded by the fight for freedom. Yet with each breath, he chose to carry those echoes not as chains, but as the forging fires of his own strength. Bound to the cause and the queen who had become his beacon, the night deepened, and the forge's flames burned bright symbols of endurance, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of those who dared to dream of a new dawn. The village square was alive with murmurs and anticipation as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across rough timber and cobblestones. Elise, her fiery red hair glowing like embers in the fading light, climbed atop the makeshift platform, a sturdy wooden crate that had seen better days but served its purpose well. Her bright green eyes scanned the growing crowd of women and curious onlookers, their faces etched with weariness from years of toil and oppression, but now lit with something sharper, hope. "We have fought beside men in silence for too long," Elise began, her voice ringing clear and unwavering despite the crackling of the distant forge fires. "Our hands have borne the weight of this rebellion, just as surely as any sword or spear, yet still, our voices are stifled, our roles dismissed. That must change." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, some nodding in fierce agreement, others hesitant but intrigued. Elise's words carried the weight of truth, and many felt the stirring of a new purpose within them. The rebellion was no longer just a fight for land or freedom from taxes. It was becoming a fight for dignity, equality, and recognition. Back at the forge, the rhythmic clanging of hammer on anvil slowed as Aveline paused, wiping sweat and soot from her brow. She listened intently as Elise's message was relayed by a returning messenger. The glow from the molten metal pool cast flickering shadows over Aveline's determined face. She thought of the women in her village, the mothers, sisters, and daughters who had quietly borne the harshest burdens of the noble's cruelty. Their strength was undeniable, but the path to equality would be steep and fraught with resistance. Later that evening, the rebel council convened within the dimly lit hall of the village's communal building. The air was thick with tension as Elise presented her proposals for formal recognition of women's rights within the movement, the right to fight, to hold leadership positions, and to share in the spoils of victory. Some male leaders, their brows furrowed and voices raised, challenged her ideas, clinging to tradition and fearing division. Jax, ever the pragmatist but loyal to both Aveline and the cause, stood calmly to her side. "Without unity, this rebellion is doomed," Jax said, his voice steady but firm. "But unity does not mean silence. We must listen and adapt. The strength of our cause lies in its people, women and men alike." His words helped temper the heated debate, planting a seed of cautious optimism. The council agreed to a trial period for women's active participation in combat and leadership roles, a fragile but hopeful compromise. Under the cloak of darkness, away from prying eyes, Elise gathered a small group of women at the edge of the village. The moon hung high and cold, their breaths rising in visible puffs as they practiced maneuvers and weapon handling. Their faces were fierce, illuminated by the flicker of torchlight, each strike and parry a defiant assertion of their place in the rebellion's future. Elise watched them with pride and fierce determination, knowing the road ahead would be laden with hardship and sacrifice. Yet, in that moment, the whisper of change was no longer a secret. It was a roaring flame, fanned by courage and the unyielding desire for justice. As the night deepened, Elise's thoughts drifted to Aveline, the blacksmith queen, whose own journey embodied the forging of a new order. Together, they would shape a rebellion not only of steel and battle, but of hearts and minds, where every voice mattered. And yet, beneath the hope, the question lingered: could the rebellion hold together as it expanded its vision? Could the old wounds of tradition heal fast enough to face the coming storm? The answers remained uncertain. But the women's voice had been raised clear, defiant, and impossible to ignore. The forge fires burned late into the night, their steady glow a reminder that even in darkness, the promise of dawn awaited. The forge's heat wrapped around Aveline like a familiar cloak, the roaring flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the soot-streaked walls. The rhythmic clang of hammer against steel filled the cramped workshop, a sound as primal and vital as the heartbeat of the rebellion itself. She bent over the anvil, sweat mingling with grime on her brow, eyes sharp and unyielding as she shaped the molten metal with exacting blows. Around her, the remnants of shattered weapons lay, scattered rusted swords, battered arrowheads, and broken blades taken from fallen comrades and foes alike. Each piece carried the weight of loss, sacrifice, and unyielding will. Tonight, Aveline was not crafting weapons for battle, but forging a crown of steel that would bind the scattered rebels into a singular force. This crown was no mere ornament. It was the embodiment of their struggle, the hard-won hope that the fires of rebellion might give birth to a new order. She struck the metal with fierce determination, melding the fragments into a circle that gleamed with the promise of justice. The sharp edges were softened by careful hammering, yet the strength of the steel remained unbroken, much like the spirit of the people it represented. Jack stood nearby, watching with a steady gaze. His lean figure was marked by years of hardship and battle, but tonight his eyes held a rare softness, a reverence for the moment unfolding before him. Elise paced quietly at the edge of the forge's glow, her red hair catching the light as she clenched her fists, the fire in her green eyes mirroring the flames. Marcel, the eager apprentice, observed from a respectful distance, his youthful face alight with wonder and pride at the craft he aspired to master. "Each strike must carry more than force," Aveline murmured, her voice steady despite the exhaustion weighing on her limbs. "It must carry our will, our unity. This crown will not just sit upon a head. It will rest upon the hopes of every man, woman, and child who dares to dream of freedom." Jack stepped forward, nodding. "It will remind us why we fight and who we fight for." Elise's voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried the weight of passion. A symbol to rally behind when the night grows darkest. Night deepened outside, but inside the forge the crown began to take shape. The metal shimmered with the hues of fire and shadow, intricate yet stark, a perfect marriage of form and function. Aveline lifted the nearly finished piece, testing its weight, feeling the cold strength that would soon warm to the blood of a new era. The rebels gathered as word spread of the crown's creation. They approached the forge under a sky heavy with stars, their faces illuminated by flickering torches and the fading glow of the forge's embers. There was a palpable hush, a reverence born of exhaustion and hope. Aveline stepped forward, the crown heavy in her hands, the weight of leadership pressing down upon her as tangibly as the steel itself. With deliberate care, she placed the crown upon her dark hair, the cold metal contrasting with the heat of her skin. The assembled rebels stared, a mixture of awe and resolve shining in their eyes. The crown was no longer just steel. It was a beacon, a promise that their fight was not in vain. Tonight Aveline's voice rang clear and strong. "We do not just stand against tyranny. We forge a future where our children will know justice, where our lives are not weighed down by fear and oppression. This crown is ours, not a symbol of power over others, but a reminder of the strength we hold together." A cheer rose, swelling into a roar that echoed through the valley, carried on the cold night air. The rebellion had found its emblem, and with it, a renewed fire burned in every heart present. Yet beneath the triumph lay the unspoken truth: the crown was heavy, and the road ahead would demand every ounce of courage and sacrifice they could muster. As the night wore on, Aveline remained at the forge, her hands steady as she made final adjustments to the crown. The flickering flames cast long shadows on her face, a portrait of fierce determination tempered by the weight of what she must become. The steel was no longer just metal. It was a testament to the fallen, the living, and the future yet unwritten. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Aveline knew the rebellion had entered a new and uncharted chapter, one where the crown of steel would lead them forward into the uncertain dawn. The air in the hidden chamber was thick with the scent of smoke and damp stone, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the rough walls. Aveline knelt by the battered wooden chest she had discovered beneath the floorboards of the abandoned manor house, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a cache of parchments, bound by crimson ribbons and stamped with the unmistakable seal of Baron de Clermont. Her heart pounded as she carefully untied the ribbons and spread the papers before her. The elegant script detailed the noble's plan, a swift, brutal assault designed to crush the rebellion once and for all. Jack stood silently behind her, his lean frame tense, eyes darting between the documents and Aveline's face. "This is worse than we feared," he muttered, voice low. "They intend to strike before winter, when our numbers are still growing, but our supplies are thin." Aveline's grey eyes narrowed, absorbing every line, every notation of troop movements and siege tactics. The plan was ruthless mercenaries to be hired, villages to be burned, and a final strike aimed directly at the heart of their stronghold. The weight of the revelation pressed down on her like the heavy anvil she worked at the forge, but beneath the crushing news was a spark of hope. Knowledge was power. "We must warn the others," she said, standing abruptly, the candlelight catching the soot smudged across her face. "If we prepare, we might stand a chance." The journey back to the rebel camp was fraught with a new urgency. Aveline and Jax moved swiftly through the dense forest, wary of spies and patrols. Upon arrival, the camp buzzed with activity, but the usual hum of hope was tinged with tension. Aveline called a gathering of her closest allies beneath the flickering flames of a bonfire, the night sky a vault of stars overhead. As she unfurled the stolen documents on a rough-hewn table, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aliz's fiery eyes met Aveline's, reflecting both fear and determination. Lady Margaret stood quietly at the edge, her noble bearing undiminished despite the dangers she faced by associating with rebels. "The Baron intends to attack soon," Aveline announced, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We have little time to prepare. We must fortify our defenses, train harder, and be ready to face what comes." Jack stepped forward, outlining the tactical advantages they could exploit. "The terrain favors us if we use it wisely. We can set traps, ambush points, but we must also protect the villages. The people are our strength." Lady Margaret's voice broke the heavy silence. "I will do what I can within the court. The Baron's men are not invincible. There are those who question his harsh methods. If I can sow discord or delay his plans, it will buy you precious time." Aveline regarded the noblewoman with a mixture of gratitude and wariness. Trust was a fragile thing, yet in this moment, their shared cause bound them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. The forge blazed day and night, steel clashing as weapons were crafted with a newfound urgency. Marcel, the eager apprentice, worked tirelessly, his youthful energy a beacon amidst the looming darkness. Aliz's speeches inspired the villagers to stand firm, her voice ringing out across the fields like a clarion call. But beneath the surface, doubts gnawed at Aveline. Each decision bore weight, each sacrifice a potential loss. Memories of fallen comrades haunted her nights, and the pressure of leadership pressed heavily on her shoulders. Yet, she found strength in the solidarity of those around her, the fierce loyalty of Jax, the unwavering resolve of Elise, and even the unexpected aid of Lady Margaret. One dawn, Aveline stood atop a ridge overlooking the village, the chill wind tugging at her dark hair. The first light of morning broke through heavy clouds, casting a pale glow over the land she had sworn to protect. In her hands, she held the ceremonial crown forged from the very steel that had armed their rebellion, a symbol of the hope and resilience they carried into the uncertain days ahead. Her gaze shifted to the horizon, where the faintest stirrings of the Baron's forces would soon appear. The coming battle was more than a fight for survival. It was a clash of ideals, a test of the human spirit against oppression. "We will not be broken," she whispered to the wind, her voice carrying the promise of fire and steel. We fight for freedom, for justice, for a future forged in courage. As the camp stirred awake, readying for what was to come, the shadow of war loomed large. Secrets had been revealed, and with them, the fragile hope of rebellion was tempered by the stark reality of sacrifice. In the heart of medieval France, beneath the weight of crowns and blades, Aveline prepared to lead her people into the storm. The forge's flames flickered in the distance, a beacon of defiance against the gathering darkness. The blacksmith queen was ready to face her destiny. And so the stage was set. The noble forces would soon march, but the fire of rebellion, kindled in the heart of a blacksmith's daughter, burned brighter than ever. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow across the war-torn valley. Aveline stood at the head of the rebel ranks, her gaze fixed upon the towering stone battlements of the noble stronghold that loomed ahead like a dark monolith against the morning sky. The air was thick with anticipation, a charged silence broken only by the soft murmurings of whispered prayers and the distant crowing of roosters heralding the new day. Around her, the faces of the peasants, men and women alike, were smeared with soot and streaked with grime from long nights spent preparing for this moment. Their eyes burned with fierce determination, a fire kindled by years of suffering and the unyielding hope for freedom. The clang of steel from the blacksmiths, forges where weapons had been tirelessly crafted, mixed with the rustling of leather and the tightening of straps as the rebels readied themselves for the assault. Jax moved swiftly beside Aveline, his lean frame tense yet steady. "The catapults are ready," he reported in a low voice, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of enemy movement. "Our archers are positioned, but the walls are heavily guarded. We must strike quickly before their reinforcements arrive." Aveline nodded, her hands tightening around the haft of her newly forged spear. "Then we give them no quarter. Today we show them the strength of the people and the steel of our resolve." The first thunderous boom shattered the quiet as the rebel catapults launched their heavy stones, sending clouds of dust and debris erupting against the outer walls. The sound was deafening, a grim herald of the violence to come. From the battlements, Baron de Clermont's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, as his knights rallied to defend their fortress with ruthless efficiency. Smoke curled into the sky, mingling with the acrid scent of burning wood and the coppery tang of blood. Aveline's heart pounded in her chest as she led the charge, the ground trembling beneath the pounding of hooves and the thunder of war cries. The clash of steel rang out as rebels met knights in fierce combat, the battlefield a swirling maelstrom of chaos and courage. Amid the fray, Elise darted through the smoke, her fiery red hair a vivid banner amid the grey haze. She delivered urgent commands and bolstered the spirits of the wary fighters with impassioned cries that cut through the din like a clarion call. "Hold the line! For freedom! For our future!" The rebels pressed forward, their makeshift weapons and homemade armor no match for the polished steel of the noble knights. Yet their spirit was indomitable. Aveline's spear found its mark again and again, her movements a blend of precision and ferocity honed at the forge and tempered on the battlefield. Beside her Jax's arrows flew true, each shaft a silent messenger of defiance. But the cost was steep. Men and women fell, their cries echoing across the battleground, mingling with the harsh commands of officers and the grinding of siege engines. The rebel banners, frayed and bloodied, still flew defiantly, symbols of hope against the oppressive shadow of the old order. High above, Baron de Clermont's cold blue eyes watched the unfolding battle, his scarred face a mask of unyielding resolve. Clad in gleaming armor, he moved with the grace and deadly intent of a seasoned warrior, cutting down those who dared breach the walls with ruthless efficiency. The clash between him and Aveline was inevitable, a collision of ideals and steel that would decide the fate of the rebellion. As the sun climbed higher, the battle raged on, a relentless storm of fury and sacrifice. Aveline's voice rose above the tumult, rallying her followers with shouts of encouragement and orders. Push forward. For the people!
For justice!
The rebels surged, breaking through the outer defenses, their cheers mingling with the cries of the wounded and the clash of combat. Yet even as victory seemed within reach, the brutal reality of war weighed heavily on Aveline's heart. Every fallen comrade was a reminder of the price of freedom, every scar a testament to the struggle yet to come. In the thick of the fight, Aveline caught sight of Jacques, his face grim but unwavering as he fended off a charge of armored knights. Elise appeared beside her, breathless but resolute, shouting, "The southern gate is weakening. We can break through there!" Seizing the moment, Aveline rallied her forces for a final push, the clang of steel and the roar of battle swelling to a fevered pitch. The rebellion's dream hung in the balance, forged in fire and blood, tested in the crucible of war. As the rebels stormed the gate, on Aveline's piercing gaze locked on the formidable walls, the promise of confrontation with Baron de Clermont burning bright in her mind. The siege had begun, and with it, the fate of a people yearning for freedom. The skies over the noble stronghold hung heavy and grey, a low rumble of thunder echoing the turmoil below. The once proud banners of Baron de Clermont fluttered desperately in the wind, battered and torn like the very order they represented. In the heart of the battlefield, where the fate of rebellion and tyranny would be decided, Aveline stood poised, her hands steady on the hilt of her sword, her breath steady despite the cacophony of war around her. She had come far from the forge where her hands had first learned the language of steel. Now, as the blacksmith queen, she bore not only a weapon, but the hopes of countless peasants who had suffered under the crushing weight of noble oppression. Her eyes, sharp and grey beneath the shadow of her hood, scanned the figure before her, Baron de Clermont. Tall, imposing, his polished armor glinted even in the dull light, his cold blue eyes fixed on her with a mixture of contempt and reluctant respect. The Baron's scarred face was a map of battles past, a testament to a life lived enforcing the rigid hierarchy of the old order. He raised his sword, the blade singing through the air with deadly intent. Aveline met his strike with her own, the clash of steel ringing out like thunder, momentarily drowning the distant cries of their armies. Around them, the battlefield was chaos, men and women fighting with desperate fury, the ground churned by hooves and blood. Their duel was more than a fight. It was a collision of worlds. Each strike carried the weight of centuries, the Baron's desire to preserve a world ruled by bloodlines and privilege. Aveline's burning resolve to forge a new future from the ashes of oppression. Their swords danced, sparks flying as metal met metal, the rhythm of their battle echoing the heartbeat of the rebellion itself. Aveline's thoughts flickered to Jacques, her steadfast friend, shouting commands to the rebels who held the line behind her. His voice was a lifeline, steady and sure amidst the chaos. Nearby, Elise's fiery speeches stirred the wary fighters, her words a balm and a beacon, reminding them why they fought. The cost had been too high, but surrender was a word Aveline had long cast aside. The Baron pressed forward, each movement a testament to his skill and years of experience. Yet beneath his calculated strikes, Aveline sensed something else: hesitation, doubt. The old order was cracking, its foundation weakened by the courage of those it sought to crush. With a sudden, fierce strike, she exploited a brief opening, her blade finding a gap in the Baron's defense. The clang of swords echoed sharply, a sound that seemed to still the very air. The Baron staggered, surprise flashing across his scarred face. For a fleeting moment, the battlefield fell away, leaving only the two of them, the old world and the new, locked in mortal combat. Aveline's heart pounded, not just with the exertion of battle, but with the weight of what this moment meant. Was this truly the turning point? Could a single victory shatter centuries of tyranny? Doubt whispered in the back of her mind, but she silenced it with the fierce clarity that had carried her this far. She pressed the attack, each movement precise, every strike a declaration. The Baron faltered again, and this time Aveline's blade found its mark. He fell to one knee, the fight draining from his eyes, replaced by a grudging respect. Around them, the rebel forces surged forward, invigorated by the sight of their leader's triumph. The noble soldiers wavered, their morale breaking like brittle glass. Yet even in victory, Aveline knew the road ahead was fraught with peril. The old order did not die easily. Breathing heavily, she lowered her sword, meeting the Baron's gaze. "This is not just my fight," she said, her voice steady despite the roar of war. "It is ours, the people's, and we will not be broken." The Baron nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement of defeat and perhaps of change. The clash of titans had ended, but the forging of a new realm was just beginning. As the sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the battlefield scattered with fallen and victorious alike, Aveline felt the weight of the crown she would soon bear, a crown not of gold, but of steel and sacrifice. The struggle was far from over, but the flame of rebellion burned brighter than ever. With a final glance at the horizon, she turned to rally her people, the Blacksmith Queen, forged by fire and tempered by resolve, ready to lead her fractured land toward a future forged in justice and hope. The sky hung low and heavy, a dull canvas smeared with smoke and ash, as the battle raging across the fields near the noble stronghold reached a fevered pitch. The ground beneath was churned to mud, soaked with blood and sweat, the air thick with the acrid scent of burning wood and metal. From behind makeshift barricades of splintered timber and overturned carts, the rebel forces braced themselves, faces streaked with grime, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. The clamor of clashing steel and the sharp cries of combatants filled the air, a chaotic symphony underscoring the desperate struggle for freedom. Aveline stood atop a small rise overlooking the battlefield, her silhouette stark against the dimming light. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, strands loose and damp with sweat, framing a face marked with soot and determination. Her piercing gray eyes scanned the fray, calculating, searching for the slightest weakness in the disciplined ranks of Baron de Clermont's knights. Around her, the murmurs of her commanders shifted to urgent whispers as the tide of battle began to shift perilously. "Jacques," she called softly, her voice steady despite the turmoil, "ready the archers for the signal. We flank at dusk. We must turn their strength against them." Jacques nodded, his lean frame tense but resolute. "They won't see it coming," he said, a flicker of grim humor in his weathered eyes. "Not if we move swift and silent." Elise approached, her red hair catching the last glow of sunlight, her green eyes alight with passion. "The people are watching, Aveline. Every move we make will inspire or break them. We cannot fail now." Aveline's lips pressed into a thin line. "We will not fail, not today." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a blood-red glow over the fields, the rebels shifted into position. From their hidden vantage, the archers nocked arrows, breath held tight, muscles coiled like springs. Aveline raised her hand, the signal clear and sharp. A sudden volley erupted, a deadly hail of arrows whistling through the air. The noble knights, caught unprepared by the flanking assault, faltered. Their disciplined formations wavered as arrows struck armor and flesh alike. Shouts of surprise and pain rang out, the once confident advance turning chaotic. Seizing the moment, Aveline led a charge with her fiercest fighters, steel flashing in the fading light. The rebels surged forward, their cries mingling with the clash of swords, the momentum swinging decisively in their favor. Yet amid the victory, the cost was painfully clear. Friends and comrades fell, their sacrifices carved into the soil like silent monuments. In the midst of the fray, Jacques fought with grim determination, his arrows finding marks with deadly precision, but haunted by memories of battles past. Elise moved among the wounded, her fiery spirit a balm to the weary and broken. Together, they embodied the resilience fueling the rebellion. As darkness embraced the battlefield, the sounds of combat slowly gave way to scattered cheers and sobs. Aveline stood among her battered but unbroken fighters, her heart heavy yet alight with hope. The tide had turned, but the war was far from over. We fight not just with steel, she whispered, voice thick with emotion, but with the fire in our souls. Tomorrow we forge our future anew. Her words hung in the night air, a beacon for those who dared to dream beyond the crown's shadow. The sun rose blood-red over the shattered battlements of the noble stronghold, casting long shadows over the broken walls and smouldering ruins that marked the end of an era. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and the metallic tang of spilled blood, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the low murmur of exhausted voices. Aveline stood at the center of the battered courtyard, her soot-streaked face illuminated by the pale morning light, eyes sharp with a fierce resolve born of countless battles and bitter loss. Months of relentless siege and unyielding struggle had brought them here, to the heart of Baron de Clermont's domain. The rebellion, once a whisper in the forge and a secret in the village shadows, had grown into a storm that tore through the old order. The clang of steel and the roar of defiance had shattered the silence of oppression, and now, as the dust settled, the true weight of their victory pressed heavily upon them. The gates had fallen at dawn, breached by the combined might of peasants turned warriors, their crude weapons tempered by Aveline's masterful forging, and their spirits hardened by years of suffering. Jax had led the vanguard, his arrows darkening the sky like a deadly rain, cutting down the noble archers who sought to defend their crumbling fortress. Alyssa's voice had soared above the chaos, rallying the rebels with fiery cries that rekindled their courage even as the battle raged around them. Inside the great hall, the once grand chamber now lay in ruins. Broken banners hung limp from shattered rafters, stained with dust and blood. The ornate tapestries that told tales of noble lineage were torn and trampled, replaced by the scars of war. It was here that Aveline found Baron de Clermont, his imposing figure diminished, armor battered and dulled, his cold blue eyes now clouded with defeat and disbelief. Their confrontation was as much a meeting of souls as of swords. The Baron sneered, a bitter edge in his voice. "You, a blacksmith's daughter, dare to defy the crown and the laws that bind us all." Aveline's gaze did not waver. "It is not the crown that binds us, but chains forged by greed and cruelty. Today those chains are broken." Steel sang as their blades clashed, a fierce dance echoing the clash of old world and new. Each strike carried the weight of history, each parry a testament to the rebellion's unyielding spirit. But it was not just strength that decided the battle. It was the fire within Aveline's heart that could not be quenched. As the Baron fell, defeated but alive, the hall echoed with the silence of an ending. Around them, the rebels tended to the wounded, their faces etched with exhaustion and pain. Flames flickered from torches, casting long shadows that danced upon the broken stones, illuminating the harsh reality of victory. The cost had been steep. Friends lost, dreams shattered, but a new dawn had been born. Lady Margaret moved quietly among the survivors, her noble grace tempered by the grime of battle. Her conflicted loyalties had found resolution in this new world forged by fire and steel. Her whispered words of aid and encouragement were a balm to weary souls and a promise of fragile alliances to come. Jax stood beside Aveline, his weathered face softened by a rare smile. "We have won the battle, but the war for our people's future is just beginning." Aveline nodded, her piercing grey eyes reflecting the weight of her new crown, not one of gold, but of steel and sacrifice. "Then we must be ready, for the forging of peace will demand the same courage as the fight for freedom." As the first light of day broke over the horizon, the rebels gathered, their voices rising in a solemn hymn of remembrance and hope. The old order had fallen, but the story of the Blacksmith Queen was only beginning. The forge was silent for now, but the fires within would burn ever brighter, shaping a new destiny from the ashes of the past. And so, amid the ruins of a once mighty stronghold, a new realm was born, a realm where justice was hammered out in the heat of struggle. And the crown was worn not by birthright, but by the will of the people. The echoes of battle faded into a quiet resolve, as Aveline and her followers prepared to face the challenges that lay ahead, their hearts bound by the unbreakable steel of rebellion and hope. The night whispered promises of peace, but the dawn carried the unspoken truth. The fall of the old order was but the first step on a long and uncertain path. And in the heart of it all stood the Blacksmith Queen, forged by fire, ready to lead her people into a new age. The village square was transformed into a grand stage. Though it bore the scars of recent conflict, the earth still bore the footprints of marching feet and the remnants of hastily erected barricades. Torches flickered in the cool evening air, casting long shadows over the expectant crowd. Aveline stood at the heart of it all, her soot-streaked face illuminated by the golden glow. Her dark hair pulled back tightly to reveal the sharp line of her jaw, and the piercing grey eyes that had become a beacon of hope to so many. The ceremonial crown was unlike any the peasants had ever seen, forged from the very weapons that had been wielded in their fight for freedom. Twisted steel entwined with iron bands, gleaming with a fierce, unyielding light. As the blacksmiths and rebels gathered around, their hands steady despite the tremors of anticipation, the crown was lifted and lowered onto Aveline's head. The sound of metal meeting metal echoed through the square like a declaration, a new chapter forged in fire and resolve. A hush fell as the crown settled, then erupted into a roar of cheers, raw, unrefined, but filled with unshackable conviction. The clang of hammers striking anvils around the square began, a rhythmic anthem that spoke of endurance, of the fires that would never be extinguished. Aveline raised her hand, calling for silence. Her voice, steady and clear, carried through the night. Today we mark not just a victory over tyranny, but the birth of a new era. We are no longer bound by the chains of oppression. Together, we forge a future where justice is hammered out with courage and compassion. From the crowd, Jax watched her, his lean frame tensed, eyes sharp beneath a furrowed brow. The weight of what they had endured, the friends lost, the villages razed, pressed upon him as heavily as the sword at his side. Yet pride shone in his gaze, a fierce loyalty that had never wavered. He stepped forward as the crowd's cheers subsided, offering a steadying presence by Aveline's side. Eliz's voice rose next, carrying the fire of rebellion into the hearts of those who listened. She spoke of rights reclaimed, of voices once silenced now echoing through the valleys and fields. Her words painted visions of a society reborn, where women and men stood as equals in the fight for liberty and dignity. Her fiery red hair caught the torchlight, her bright green eyes alight with passion. The crowd responded with fervor, their spirits lifted by the promise of change. Amid the jubilation, a more subtle arrival was made. Lady Margaret approached the dais with measured steps, her noble attire contrasting with the ruggedness around her. Her face bore the marks of inner conflict, the elegance of her bearing softened by the sincerity in her eyes. She extended a hand toward Aveline, a gesture of alliance and reconciliation. "This crown," she said quietly, "is a symbol not only of rebellion, but of the possibility that even the old can change. The road ahead will not be easy, but perhaps together we can forge a peace worthy of this sacrifice." Aveline regarded her carefully, sensing both the risks and the opportunity in this fragile alliance. The cheers faded into the night, replaced by the steady rhythm of hammer on metal, the sound of a future still being forged. As the festivities waned, Aveline found a moment alone at the forge. The embers glowed softly, reflecting in her eyes like distant stars. The weight of the crown pressed not just on her head, but on her soul. She thought of the families who had lost everything, the friends who would never see this day, and the uncertain path that lay ahead. Yet beneath it all burned a fierce determination, a resolve tempered by every trial faced and every victory won. Her journey from the forge to the crown was complete, but the true test of her reign was only just beginning. The Blacksmith Queen was no longer just a symbol, she was a leader, a ruler, and a beacon for those who dared to dream of freedom. And in the quiet clatter of steel on anvil, The promise of a new world was hammered deep into the very heart of medieval France. "We have forged this moment from fire and blood," Aveline whispered to the night, "and we shall protect it with all that we are." The stars overhead seemed to burn a little brighter, as if in answer. The forge's flames flickered steady and strong, a beacon in the darkness, a crown of steel and hope. But even as joy swelled in the village, shadows lingered at the edges. Old rivalries simmered beneath the surface, and whispers of dissent could be heard among the ranks. The fragile peace would demand vigilance, and the sacrifices had not ended. The crown was heavy, but the blacksmith queen was ready to bear its weight. For the sake of her people, for the promise of justice, and for the future The morning air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and ash, the sky a leaden grey that seemed to mirror the weight pressing down on Aveline's shoulders. She stood at the edge of the graveyard, where rows of freshly turned soil marked the resting places of those who had fallen in the relentless tide of their rebellion. Her breath came in shallow, cold gusts, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves stirred by an uneasy wind. Before her lay the graves of comrades, friends, and strangers alike whose lives had been claimed by the brutal cost of uprising. Each mound was a testament to sacrifice, a silent witness to the fires of freedom that had been stoked at such a grievous price. Aveline's eyes, sharp and piercing beneath her soot-streaked brow, lingered on the iron flower she held in her hands, an emblem of the forge, of steel tempered by fire, and of lives forged anew through struggle. With careful fingers, she placed the flower atop one grave, the cold metal a stark contrast to the soft earth beneath. The moment hung between grief and resolve, a fragile bridge between mourning and the fierce determination to carry on. Her heart ached with the loss, but her spirit refused to break. Behind her, footsteps approached softly. Jacques emerged from the shadows, his lean frame wary but steadfast. His weathered face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much war, too much loss. "They fought bravely," he said quietly, eyes scanning the solemn rows, "and we must honor that by not letting their deaths be in vain." Aveline nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every sacrifice binds us closer. We cannot falter now." They moved together toward the war tent, where Elise awaited with news and restless energy. Inside, the flickering firelight cast long shadows on canvas walls. Elise's fiery red hair caught the light as she spoke earnestly about the growing fractures within their ranks, whispers of distrust, fears of betrayal. "We've come so far," Elise said, her green eyes flashing with passion. "But the enemy isn't only outside these walls. We must hold fast, or all will be lost." Jacques, ever the pragmatist, nodded soberly. "Unity is our greatest weapon. We can't allow suspicion to tear us apart." Their voices wove a tapestry of tension and hope, the fragile threads of trust strained by the shadows of recent betrayals, but still holding strong. Meanwhile, in the forge, Marcel hammered steadily, the rhythmic clang of steel ringing out like a heartbeat against the silence of loss. Sweat beaded on his youthful brow, but his hands were steady, shaping the metal with a quiet determination that spoke of hope and renewal. Each weapon he forged carried the weight of the rebellion's ideals and the dreams of a future free from tyranny. Aveline observed him briefly, a faint smile breaking through her somber expression. "He is the promise of tomorrow," she said softly. "We fight not just for ourselves, but for those who will come after." Nightfall brought a different kind of meeting. In a secluded garden bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Aveline and Lady Margaret spoke in hushed tones. The noblewoman's face was composed, yet her eyes betrayed the wariness of a soul caught between worlds. "The old order is crumbling," Lady Margaret admitted, fingers twisting a delicate lace handkerchief. "But change is fraught with peril. We must tread carefully, lest we lose everything we seek to gain." Aveline's gaze was steady, unwavering. Trust is a rare gift in times like these. But it is the only path forward. Their alliance, tenuous but vital, underscored the complexity of the new world, They sought to build a world where former enemies might find common cause in the hope for justice. As the night deepened, Aveline returned to her quarters, the echoes of the day's grief and determination mingling in her mind. The faces of the fallen haunted her thoughts, their sacrifices etched into the very fabric of her being. Yet, beneath the sorrow, a fierce flame burned, a flame that would not be extinguished. Tomorrow the rebellion would continue. The forge would blaze anew. And the blacksmith queen would carry the weight of her crown and her people, forged in steel and sacrifice. But as she drifted into restless sleep, a question lingered in the silence. How long could hope endure amidst such relentless loss? The story of sacrifice and endurance stretched on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit even in the darkest hours. And within that struggle, Aveline's legend grew an unyielding beacon for all who dared to dream of freedom. In the days that followed, the rebels gathered to honor their fallen. The village square, once vibrant with life, was now somber, draped with banners stained by smoke and battle. Aveline stood before the assembled crowd, her voice steady despite the weight in her chest. "We stand here not just to mourn," she declared, "but to remember the cost of our hope. Their blood waters the seed of change. We owe it to them to persevere." Tears glistened on many faces, but so did resolve. Jackie stepped forward, sharing tales of bravery and sacrifice, reminding all that the fight was far from over. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty simmered. The fractures within the rebellion threatened to widen, as differing visions for the future clashed. Elise rallied the women, demanding recognition and rights, while others questioned the direction of their cause. Aveline found herself navigating these turbulent waters, balancing compassion with the iron will necessary to lead. The burden was immense, and the nights grew long with doubts and strategies alike. Through it all, the forge remained her sanctuary. With each strike of hammer on anvil, she cast not just weapons but hope, each piece a promise that the rebellion's flame would not die. The echoes of sacrifice reverberated through every corner of their world, a solemn reminder that freedom was never without cost. But in that cost lay the strength to build anew a realm forged not just in steel, but in the hearts of those who dared to believe. And so, beneath the heavy sky of a land scarred by war, the blacksmith queen stood unbowed, ready to face the trials yet to come. The dawn broke over the village with a muted glow, the sky painted in soft hues of amber and rose. Aveline stood atop the makeshift dais in the center of the square, her gaze sweeping over the gathered crowd. Faces marked by hardship and loss turned toward her, eyes flickering with a mixture of hope, fear, and skepticism. The steel crown she wore, forged from the weapons of their rebellion, caught the early light, casting glimmers like fire across the sea of worn clothing and weathered skin. Today, she began, her voice clear and unwavering despite the weight it carried. "We stand not only as survivors of a war, but as architects of a new future. The old order has fallen, and with it, the chains of oppression that bound us for generations. But the work ahead is no less daunting than the battles we fought. We must rebuild not just buildings and fields, but trust, justice, and hope." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding with determination, others exchanging wary glances. The scars of conflict were fresh. Memories of burned homes, lost kin, and broken promises lingered like shadows. Aveline could feel the tension in the air, the fragile thread of unity stretched taut. After the speech, she descended the dais and made her way to the hall where Lady Margaret awaited. The noblewoman's presence was a stark contrast to the rustic surroundings, her posture poised, eyes sharp beneath finely arched brows. Their alliance was uneasy, forged in necessity rather than trust. "The lands you propose to redistribute will not be surrendered without resistance," Margaret said, her tone measured but firm. "Many nobles still cling to their titles and privileges, and some peasants themselves are skeptical of such sweeping changes." Aveline met her gaze steadily. "Justice is not given, Lady Margaret. It is earned through courage and sacrifice. We must be firm but fair." Their negotiations stretched into the night, words weaving a delicate dance between concession and resolve. Each concession was a step toward peace, each demand a reminder of the fragile balance they sought to maintain. Outside, Jax awaited her, his lean frame silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Together, they walked through the fields that had once been battlefields, now silent but for the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves. The devastation was a stark reminder of the cost borne by their people. "They look to you for guidance," Jax said quietly. "But many still question whether peace can truly last." Aveline sighed, her eyes tracing the horizon where dawn would soon break. "Peace is a forge, Jax. It requires patience, heat, and hammering to shape something strong." Back at the forge, the rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil echoed like a heartbeat of renewal. Marcel, young and eager, shaped the glowing metal under Aveline's watchful eye. Sparks flew, scattering light like stars in the dim morning, illuminating the hope that still burned within their hearts. One day, Aveline murmured, "These tools will build not just weapons." The days that followed tested her resolve. Resistance bubbled beneath the surface, nobles plotting in shadowed chambers, peasants divided by fear and old grievances. Yet Aveline met each challenge with fierce determination, her leadership a beacon in uncertain times. In the quiet moments, she wrestled with the burden of her crown, the weight of expectation, and the sacrifices demanded by the path she chose. But beneath it all, the fire of hope burned steady, a promise that from the ashes of war, a new realm could be forged. The wind swept cold across the hilltop as Aveline stood silently, her gaze fixed on the village below. The orange hues of dusk stretched long shadows across the thatched roofs, the smoke from hearth fires curling upward like whispers in the fading light. Despite the peace that had settled after the rebellion's victory, a restless tension clung to the air, a shadow lurking unseen but deeply felt. In the council chamber, the flickering candlelight danced across weathered faces. Jax sat rigidly, his sharp eyes scanning every expression, while Lady Margaret's hands clasped tightly in her lap, betraying the calm she strove to project. The room was thick with unspoken fears, the old wounds of war had not yet healed, and the fragile alliances that had held the rebellion together now trembled under renewed strain. Lady Margaret's voice broke the silence, low and urgent. "There are rumors, Aveline. Noble houses still loyal to Baron de Clermont plot in the shadows. They seek to exploit the divisions among us, to fracture your council, and destabilize the peace." Aveline's piercing grey eyes narrowed, the weight of leadership pressing down like the anvil beneath her hammer. "We cannot afford fractures now," she said steadily. "Our strength lies in unity. We must root out these conspiracies before they take hold." Jax nodded, his lean frame taut with resolve. "I've heard whispers from the border villages. Some still cling to the old ways, fearful of change. They could be swayed by promises of favor or threatened into rebellion." The days that followed were a delicate dance of vigilance and diplomacy. Aveline traversed the countryside, meeting with village leaders and peasant captains, listening to grievances and soothing fears. At the forge, she worked late into the night, the rhythmic pounding of steel echoing her determination to build not just weapons, but a future. Lady Margaret moved with quiet grace through the noble courts, her every word measured and cautious. She navigated treacherous waters, gathering intelligence and quietly undermining those who sought to topple the new order. Her conflicted loyalties weighed heavily, but her belief in Aveline's vision gave her purpose. One evening, as a chill mist rose from the riverbank, Jackie's trained a band of new recruits. Their wooden swords clashed softly in the dawn light, faces set with grim determination. The scars of past battles ran deep, but so did their hope for a life unshackled from tyranny. Yet shadows persisted. Under the cover of darkness, secret meetings convened in ruined chapels and abandoned barns. Whispers of betrayal and plots to seize power seeped through the ranks like poison. Aveline's sharp mind and keen instincts uncovered a conspiracy led by a faction of nobles desperate to reclaim their former dominance. Confronting the conspirators was a test of both courage and political acumen. Aveline exposed their machinations before the council and rallied her followers against the threat. The betrayal shook the rebellion's foundation, but also steeled its resolve. As the chapter closed, Aveline stood once more on the hilltop, the first light of dawn breaking through dispersing clouds. The path ahead remained fraught with peril, but the Blacksmith Queen's fire burned brighter still, a beacon against the encroaching darkness. "We have endured much," she whispered to the wind, "and we will endure yet more. For the sake of our people, for the promise of a new dawn, we must stand firm. Shadows may persist, but so will we." Her voice carried on the breeze, a vow forged in steel and struggle, echoing across the land she was determined to heal and protect. The fragile peace was a treasure hard won, and Aveline would fight with every breath to ensure it endured. The forge's glow cast flickering shadows across Aveline's face as she hammered steadily, the rhythmic clang of steel against steel echoing through the hollow room. Yet her mind was far from the cold metal she shaped. Each strike mirrored the pounding of her heart, heavy with the memory of Henry's last touch. The noble knight's conflicted gaze haunted her, a tempest of desire and restraint that neither could fully quell. She paused, wiping the sweat and soot from her brow, her piercing grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Outside, the village slept uneasy, the quiet before the storm. Aveline's thoughts spiraled. Was this secret love a beacon of hope or a perilous distraction? Her fingers traced the blade's edge, sharp and unyielding, much like the path she had chosen. Days before, beneath the canopy of ancient oaks, she had met Henry in the guise of twilight. The forest's whispered secrets enveloped them as their hands brushed, promises exchanged in breathless murmurs. His voice, low and tender, spoke of a world where duty might bend to love, a world they both longed for but dared not claim. The risk was great. Discovery could mean death, or worse, the unraveling of the fragile rebellion she had forged. Jax, ever vigilant, had caught wind of their clandestine meetings. By the campfire's glow, his lean figure loomed as he confronted her, eyes sharp with concern. "Aveline," he said quietly but firmly, "this affair, it's a blade that cuts both ways. The nobles watch for weakness. If they find it in you, they will strike with no mercy." She met his gaze, the weight of his words settling like cold iron in her chest. Loyalty and love, leadership and longing, how could she balance these without losing herself? Jack's warning was not just caution. It was a plea born from the scars of battle and the knowledge of what was at stake. That night, alone in her chamber, Aveline sat before the steel crown she had fashioned, its cold surface gleaming like the destiny she bore. The crown was more than metal. It was the embodiment of sacrifice, power, and the heavy burden of command. Her fingers traced its ridges, each dent a memory of comrades lost, battles won, and the price of rebellion. Her heart ached for Henry, for the stolen moments that seemed to promise a different life. But the fires of her forge and the cries of her people called louder. In the silence, she whispered a vow to protect her people, to wield her crown with justice, and to carry the heart's burden with courage. Outside, the first light of dawn broke, casting steel blue hues across the sky. Aveline rose, resolve hardening within her. The rebellion was far from over, and her path fraught with peril, love, and sacrifice was hers alone to walk. The forge awaited, the crown beckoned, and the heart's burden pressed ever heavier, shaping the woman who would become the Blacksmith Queen. As the village stirred, whispers of hope and fear intertwined like the steel she forged. The rebellion's fate and her own hung in delicate balance, poised on the edge of a blade. And deep within, Aveline knew that the choices she made in the coming days would echo through the ages, a testament to the cost of love and leadership in a world forged by fire and blood. The morning sun filtered softly through the cracks in the forge's wooden walls, casting long, warm beams that danced across the scattered tools and heaps of coal. Marcel stood over the anvil, his young hands steady but filled with purpose, as he raised the hammer once again. The glowing metal beneath his strike sang with each measured blow, sparks erupting like tiny stars in the dim light. Nearby, Aveline watched closely, her piercing grey eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and wistfulness. The weight of years pressed upon her shoulders, yet in this moment, as the rhythmic clang echoed through the forge, she saw the promise of the future, a future not solely held in her hands, but in the hands of those she had nurtured. "Careful," she said softly, stepping closer. "The metal must be hot enough to bend, but not so hot that it breaks. Feel its rhythm, Marcel. The steel speaks to those who listen." Marcel nodded, sweat beading on his brow as he focused intently. "I feel it, Aveline, like the heartbeat of the rebellion." She smiled, the faintest curve of warmth beneath the suit's streaked face. "Exactly. Every weapon we forge, every tool we craft, carries more than just metal. It carries hope, resistance, and the dream of justice." Outside, the village was alive with a new energy. The scars of battle and loss still marred the landscape, but life had begun to pulse anew. Children chased one another along the dirt paths, merchants reopened their stalls, and women stitched banners that fluttered proudly from wooden poles. Among them moved Elise, her red hair aflame against the grey stone walls, her bright green eyes alight with fierce determination. That afternoon, Elise ascended a makeshift platform erected in the village square. The gathered crowd hushed as she stepped forward, the weight of her presence commanding attention. "Brothers and sisters," her voice rang clear and unwavering, "our fight has never been only for freedom from tyranny. It is also a fight for the rights of all who have been silenced, and oppressed women, children, the poor. We must not rebuild the world as it was, but as it should be." Cheers erupted, fists raised in solidarity. Elise's words ignited a fire in hearts already tempered by struggle. The campaign for women's rights, once a whispered hope, now surged forward as a pillar of the rebellion's evolving vision. Aveline stood at the edge of the crowd, her gaze steady and thoughtful. Jax, ever vigilant, stood beside her, his lean frame tense with cautious optimism. "They listen," he murmured, "but change is never without cost." "True," she replied. "But if we do not push forward now, the flame will fade. We owe it to those who fell and those yet to come." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a soft amber glow, Aveline returned to the forge. Marcel was there, tending the coals, his youthful enthusiasm undimmed by the hardships they had endured. "You did well today," she said, her voice gentle yet resolute. He looked up, eyes shining with gratitude and determination. "I want to carry this flame, Aveline, to keep the rebellion alive, not just with weapons, but with hope." She placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Then you shall. The crown may rest on my head, but the forge, the true heart of our cause, beats in you, and all who believe." The night deepened, but within the forge, the glow of the embers refused to dim. It was a beacon to the wary and the brave alike, a symbol that the fight for justice, equality, and a better world was far from over. In the faces of the new generation, in the rallying cries of women like Elise, and in the steady hands of apprentices like Marcel, the rebellion found its renewed flame, a flame that promised to burn bright through the darkest of nights. Yet beneath this hopeful blaze, shadows lingered, old rivalries whispered anew, and the fragile peace trembled beneath the weight of unspoken fears. As Aveline gazed into the flames, her heart steeled itself for the battles yet to come, battles not only of sword and hammer, but of hearts and minds. For in the forging of a new world, the greatest challenge was yet to be met: to unite a fractured people, and to kindle a flame of hope that would endure beyond her reign. And so, with resolve hardening like the steel she shaped, Aveline stepped forward, ready to lead once more, not just as a queen forged by rebellion, but as a beacon for all who dared to dream of freedom. The forge was quiet now, save for the soft crackling of dying embers and the occasional hiss of cooling steel. Aveline stood alone amidst the shadows, the dim orange light outlining the soot on her cheeks and the deep lines etched by countless hours at the anvil. Her hands, still stained with soot and scars, hung loosely at her sides, but her piercing grey eyes burned with a fierce light. It was here, in the very heart of the forge, that her journey had begun as a blacksmith's daughter, learning to shape metal with patient care and relentless fire. Now, she was no longer just a smith but a queen, a symbol born of steel and struggle. She breathed deeply, the scent of burning coal and iron filling her lungs, grounding her in the present. Outside, the village stirred quietly, tentative in the calm that followed years of blood and fury. The rebellion had carved a new path through the land, but the future remained as uncertain as molten metal waiting to be molded. Yet, for the first time in many seasons, hope glimmered like a polished blade in the sun. The ceremony had been solemn, marked by the weight of loss and the promise of renewal. In the great hall, banners torn and faded hung alongside fresh ones, bearing the emblem of the blacksmith, queen, a crown wrought from rebel-forged steel. Her allies stood close, faces etched with exhaustion and pride. Jax, ever watchful, caught her eye and offered a faint nod. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes of battles survived, of comrades fallen, and of the road still ahead. Alyssa's passionate voice had echoed through the hall moments before, reminding all that their fight was not yet done. Women, peasants, and former servants now shoulder to shoulder with those who had once bent beneath tyranny. The campaign for rights, justice, and dignity thrummed like a heartbeat beneath the surface of the new order. Lady Margaret, elegant and enigmatic, had quietly pledged her support, her conflicted loyalties now aligned with a future that defied old nobility. In a quiet corner, Marcel, young and eager, hammered a fresh blade. His movements were steady but filled with the unyielding hope of a new generation. Watching him, Aveline felt the weight of her responsibility settle like the heavy crown now resting upon her brow. This was no mere ornament. It was a symbol forged in fire and blood, a reminder that leadership demanded sacrifice and unbreakable resolve. As the sun rose beyond the horizon, casting pale light over the village, Aveline stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp with the scent of earth and promise. She raised her gaze to the sky, the vast expanse a mirror of the boundless challenges and hopes that lay ahead. Her voice, steady and clear, rose in a vow to her people, a pledge to guard their freedoms and forge a realm where justice would endure. The road would be long and fraught with peril, but the blacksmith queen was ready. For her people, for the fallen, and for the future, she would wield her crown as she once had the hammer, with strength, purpose, and an unyielding heart. And so, beneath the steel sky of medieval France, a new chapter was forged, one of resilience, hope, and the enduring flame of rebellion. The forge and the crown, forever intertwined, marked the dawn of a kingdom born from fire and struggle,